Okay, perfect. Welcome everyone to this IAQM webinar, Schools Air Quality Monitoring for Health and Education. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Rhys Archer, Research Fellow and Citizen Science Research Group Coordinator at the Stockholm Environment Institute at the University of York. Today's webinar will be about the SAMHE project, or Schools Air Quality Monitoring for Health and Education. This is an indoor air quality research project funded by the EPSRC that utilises citizen science methods to co-design, collect and analyse data on classroom air quality. As always for these webinars, there will be a chance to ask questions at the end of the presentation, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation, and I will then ask these on your behalf later on. Thanks so much for logging in. Great to see so many of you here today, and thank you to Rhys. I'll hand over to you now, Rhys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today to talk about SAMHE. So SAMHE is a project. It's Schools Air Quality Monitoring for Health and Education. And it's a research project that's run by a consortium of partners. So the University of Surrey, University of Cambridge, Imperial College London, the University of Leeds, the UK HSA, and funded by EPSRC. So we've got a really large team, and that's because what we're trying to do is actually on quite a large scale. We're aiming to get an unparalleled data set of air quality in schools. So I'm Dr. Rhys Archer, and I'm a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute at the University of York. And I'm trained as a materials engineer, but I'm moving more into citizen science, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about citizen science methods and how they can be used for this type of research throughout this presentation. So first of all, so SAMHE, so what SAMHE is it's a large-scale project where we are sending air quality monitors into schools across England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And it's a project to try and improve the understanding of indoor air quality, know what interventions that schools can take, and also for us to have this data set of what air quality in schools actually looks like. To do that, we use citizen science methods to work with teachers and pupils. And what that means is, alongside the air quality monitor, we also give them access to a web app, which we've put together, which has a range of different resources and activities, which means that teachers and pupils can log on, take part in these activities, and that serves two purposes. One, we get more contextual data. So rather than just receiving what the CO2 is at a certain time, we can ask them to open windows, close windows, do some exercise, open an orange in front of the monitor. We can ask them about how many windows and doors they have, how old the school is, a whole range of different activities to get additional data sets for us to be able to understand that air quality data more. So the monitors themselves, they will be monitoring carbon dioxide levels, temperature, relative humidity, particulate matter, and total volatile organic compounds. So there's a range of data that we're looking at as well. So I've mentioned citizen science a few times. So citizen science is a form of scientific research. It's a method where we involve members of the public in that research. It can be really difficult to define citizen science. So some people will do a citizen science project where they ask members of the public to count the amount of birds in their garden and input that. And that's quite a light touch, but it's probably the most common type of citizen science. Whereas as researchers, we try and be a lot more collaborative in our citizen science, and we really try and follow something called the 10 principles of citizen science, where it's not just about engagement, it's about real scientific work, real scientific data, but the public being involved in as much of that as possible. So in idea generation, in actually doing the research, in doing the analysis, in doing the dissemination. And what we see there is it produces much richer data sets. It also means a higher capital in the science capital in the public. It can also mean that we're not in a bubble. So there's a lot which is around no research about us without us. So when we work with teachers, they can tell us things that as researchers we wouldn't necessarily know about the school environment, about the timings, about what usually happens. So it makes our research less theoretical and much more realistic, and so we can have much better impacts with that research as well. It can cover a whole range of approaches and a whole range of disciplines. So social sciences, humanities, natural sciences, increasingly more engineering, and it's becoming a lot more popular throughout the sciences. There's a diversity of purposes, and it takes place in a variety of cultural contexts. And one of the really powerful things about citizen science is we can start to challenge some of the norms that there have been in traditional research. So any of the biases that have crept in from, perhaps science being a predominantly male field in the past, particularly predominantly white field potentially, we can actually start working with a much wider range of people, more diverse range of people, to really understand and build up a real picture of what's happening. And it can also overlap with a range of other participatory research approaches as well. So it's citizen science at its core should always be beneficial for both science and the researchers and for participants. So the pupils and teachers will gain knowledge and understanding of air quality. In our case, they'll have access to a web app, they'll have access to their own data and know what to do with it. They'll gain scientific skills and knowledge of what action to take. So to not be exploitative through citizen science, it's really important that we have that legacy. And it's not just that once we've got what we need out to these schools, we just leave them, so we've been told we've got really high CO2 levels, but we don't know what to do about it. It's in building in that awareness and that knowledge so that they can make their own interventions, they can make their own analysis and their own actions through the work. And then for science and for researchers, what we get is all of this data about air quality in schools. So the SAMHE project itself will end next August, but the real work after that really starts, because that's when we can take this data set of a year and a half of air quality data from schools, and researchers can start, playing with it and seeing what comes out of it, and it will spawn lots of other projects. So I mentioned before there's different types of citizen science, and we can look at it in terms of contributory citizen science, collaborative citizen science, and co-created citizen science. And like I said, contributory citizen science is where the public are involved in just the data collection. So, count the number of birds in your garden, put it into an app or a website, and then see if you notice any trends. There's collaborative, which is where the public are involved in methods development, data collection, data analysis, and dissemination. So obviously that's a lot more involved. But again, it can really improve. It can make sure that the research is really relevant, and it can make sure that that analysis and that dissemination is getting to all the places it needs to go. I also work on a project around youth mental health, and we found a huge discrepancy between what research is out there and what the young people actually know about. And so that dissemination part is so important, because it means actually we're getting this information and this research and this knowledge to all the places it needs to get to, which might not usually happen through traditional research methods. And then we have co-creation, which is where the public are involved in every part of the research. And that means right at the beginning. So before we've even put in our proposals, we're talking to the public about what type of research is needed, what gaps are there, what questions do they have, what do they feel like they don't hear enough about or they're confused about, what answers would they like, what kind of actions would they like, and it's co-created all the way through. So SAMHE is a collaborative citizen science project. So we worked up the proposal as researchers, but then as soon as we started the project, we were working with teachers and pupils in schools to develop how we were going to do this project. And then they're involved in the data collection. Through the activities, they're also involved in data analysis. So we have an activity called Data Detectives, where if they've noticed something unusual in their data, they can pinpoint it and work through these questions to try and understand what it is and analyze that data, which again is really useful skills for the school and for them to also know what's happening. But it's a really great bit of analysis that's done for us for when we start looking at the data sets. And then through dissemination as well, the young people are encouraged with activities such as write to your MP to tell the MP what they're doing, what if there's an issue in their school, to be sharing and talking about what they see with their other classmates. So we think this is a really rich way of doing science, and particularly doing air quality science, because we're not only getting the data that we need, but we're raising awareness, raising understanding, and raising knowledge of the interventions and what the research is saying. So I've mentioned the web app, so I've got a video just to take you through what the web app actually looks like. So this is the landing page which schools and pupils will have access to, and each student will have their own login as well as the teachers. We can see on this side that they can see all of the data, and this is real-time data from their monitor. And then we can see the different types of activities that we have on the other side as well. I will go through this in another video as well, so we can have a look closely at the activities. Here we can see all the different data views they have access to, and they can also download their data, so teachers can choose how to use this within their classrooms. And then these are the different types of activities. We're currently in the process of adding more activities in there as well. And we've also added some gamification. So for each activity that they complete, they get a certain amount of points towards these different things. And this was something that during the trial period, the pupils and the teachers were really excited about, as well as things like our SAMHE certificates. Taking a closer look at the activities. So this is the activities page. And so we've got a real mixture of activities which benefit us for getting contextual data, that benefit the school by increasing impact and knowledge, and then a combination of the two, like our data detectives. So looking at measuring CO2 levels before and after exercise, this is an example of the type of activities that we have. And it's where we can encourage the students to actually change what's happening in their classroom. So for this one, we asked them to close the windows and exercise for 2 minutes, see what happens to the carbon dioxide levels, and then to start thinking about why that is, having those type of discussions. And so for us, we get a timestamp. So in our data, we'll have this timestamp where we say, oh, at this time they completed this activity, and with 22 students in the classroom all exercising, this is what happened to the carbon dioxide level. And we can start to use that to understand a bit more about the ventilation in those schools. For the young people and for the teachers, they get this to see this real change and what's happening, and start to understand more about respiratory, about the environment that they're in, about what it means, and start to have some of these discussions, which are a really important starting point for thinking about air quality and thinking about ventilation. One of the parts that I'm particularly excited about are these data views. In schools, one of the things can be that they don't often have access to this real-time data that is about their classroom itself, that they can start to play with and look at. And so this is a really good tool for schools. And we've got this site here where we can manipulate the graphs and the plots that we see to aid understanding. And we can look at the last hour, the last day, the last week, or the whole year. And so you can really start to see trends or patterns. So one of the casual activities we've asked is looking at what's happened over summer. Are there any peaks in the carbon dioxide, and can you attribute that to anything? So for instance, A-level results day, there might be a peak because there's suddenly more people coming in. Can you see that there's a peak at 8 o'clock every day? And could that be when the cleaners are still coming in? So starting to really understand what's happening with this data. So as I said, our type of citizen science is collaborative, and what that meant is during our methods phase, we had a co-design period where we worked together with a number of schools to design what the SAMHE project would look like. And then we had a pioneer phase where we worked with teachers to try out some of the things that we were putting together as we were building the project. And there was 123 schools that took part in those phases. We've got 800 schools signed up so far. I think that number is more like 1,200 now. We've got another big recruitment drive since everybody's back from summer now, to try and get up to having SAMHE quality monitors in 2,000 schools across the UK. And if we can get that, I think we'll be the largest schools air quality research project in the world. And that would result in some really, really interesting data that we will get, but then other researchers can also look at and should have a really good or an important impact for air quality in schools. One of our teachers from the co-design school said this lovely quote about how the SAMHE Monitor and app have helped the Year 4 and 5 science group with data. And it's been really exciting to see the schools using this data because, like I said, having this real-time, sometimes science in schools can be quite an abstract concept, and especially with air quality, we can't see it. We can't form, Bunsen burner activities where the flame goes green. So having this tool where students can actually see the air quality through this data, and they can understand what particulate matter is, what volatile organic compounds are, why it's important to look at CO2, where that comes from, thinking about temperature, thinking about humidity. All of these things is really laying that basis to have a generation of young people who are knowledgeable, who are aware, who know what this data looks like and know why it's important and know how to interrogate it as well. And like the teacher said there, they're really keen on being able to earn all the achievement badges. So that element of gamification that we've used is also another kind of participatory method that we've brought in to the SAMHE project. So it is challenging working with young people about indoor air quality. Like I said, it's largely invisible, and also children are particularly vulnerable. They spend a lot of their time in schools, and so the air quality of schools is so important. And when we think about that health and education, this is something that we really want to be monitoring and looking at and eventually being able to improve. Ventilation is important, but we're also in a cost of living crisis. So one of the things through the winter, which is quite good, is about letting teachers know when they need to ventilate and actually when they don't. So if the carbon, if they don't need an open window because the carbon dioxide level is quite low, shutting that window can save on energy prices. It's about informing people to be able to take informed actions. And of course, raising awareness as well, and giving different types of tailored advice for those schools. So I've just got a quick example of some of the data that we've got. This must have been from our pioneer phase, so that's why it's just 43 monitors. We're still currently in the stage of the project where we're working out how we want to draw out the data, how we want to present that data so that it can be interrogated by our researchers in the best way. But the daily means are largely below the threshold of 1,500 parts per million for naturally ventilated classrooms, and about 2.5% of sensor days that threshold is exceeded, and that's for carbon dioxide. And then for particulate matter, generally it's below the guidelines that are recommended by the World Health Organization, except for on about 4% a day. So this is like a very, very small snapshot of the kind of data that we'll be able to get out. But we're also going to be able to do more localized, looking at, the regions that these different schools are, where the trends are. It really is, there are so many different lines of inquiry that we can take with a data set as large as this. So that's the SAMHE project. Please do get in touch if you have any questions or if there's anything that you think we can work together on. we're not strictly working with other organisations at this point, but we are starting to look at what SAMHE looks like after next August. And if you are in touch with any schools or any school groups or anybody that you think would be interested in signing up for SAMHE, please do let them know. Like I said, we're having a big push to try and get this into as many schools as possible at the minute. So any help would be greatly appreciated. And you can email the SAMHE email address there, or that's my work email address as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Rhys, for that introduction to SAMHE. Really interesting to hear about the citizen science project. Please, to all our attendees, please do put your questions in for Rhys into the Q&A function. I can see there's already a lot coming through. To kick things off, I wondered if you would just provide some reflections, Rhys, on this type of collaborative citizen science project and some of the key challenges you faced in doing this project.
Well, I'll be honest, there's a lot of challenges. But that's across the board in all of the type of citizen science work I do. At the minute, there's a real pressure on teachers and schools. There's not a lot of capacity and there's not a lot of time. We really have to bend over backwards to try and make sure that what we're presenting it can be integrated. And that's why it's so important having teachers involved in the planning stages, the methods. Because if we had said, we want you to spend 5 hours a week on this, they'd be like, no. So we've been able to design something which is manageable for schools, but teachers are overworked. Teachers have got a lot on their plate, particularly after the pandemic and young people. It's lots of teachers say to us, I would love to do this, but I do not have time. A lot of teachers aren't particularly supported to be doing activities like this. And we have made it so that this fits in with the curriculum, so it can be used in classes as well as after school activities. But, it's something new and it's something different. And so it can be very difficult to get that engagement with schools.
That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of kind of going into schools and the ones that you do engage with, what kind of training do the kind of staff get in getting involved in the project, and how much support do they get? So we have one attendee here saying that they're a STEM ambassador. Do they get people like that involved as well?
Yeah, so if you're that will be down to the schools. So what we provide is the monitor and the web app. And we do also have, like connection issues. We have an email address that they can email if they have any issues there. But actually everything is through the web app. So there's a tutorial on there. You don't need any particular training to operate the monitor. You plug it in, you can see the data and you can use it how you see fit. So obviously, ideally for us, we'd have schools completing all of the activities and moving their monitor around. But schools can also just look at it once every 3 months, do some of the surveys every now and then. It's very flexible. So we don't train teachers per se, but we are on the other end of an email address for any kind of help and advice. We have a newsletter which we get sent out with tips, and we also have an active Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it now, with tips as well.
Amazing. So you touched there on the kind of monitors. We've had a few questions coming through asking about kind of what monitors are being used. Is it one type of device or multiple? And in terms of the kind of technical specs, in terms of data reliability and calibration requirements, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this definitely isn't my wheelhouse. So I know that we have the monitors from Air Gradient, and so they were worked up in collaboration at the beginning of the project. I don't know much about the calibration. I know that, we say it's real time, but actually there's probably a 30-second delay in data. And that is the extent of my knowledge on the monitors, but it is one monitor that we send in. In fact, if you give me a second, I can just show you the monitor. So this here is the monitor. It's by Air Gradient, and it is just that one monitor. And what that means is it's as easy as possible for schools to connect it up and just have one wire and then connect it to the school's Wi-Fi. That is then, you use then the reference number on there to log into the web app. So we have all the details and all the sharing of data.
Great, thank you. And then talking a little bit about the schools that are involved, is it both primary and secondary schools that you're involved with? And what kind of age groups do you see that are mainly engaged in using it?
Yeah, so we did this slightly ridiculous thing where we decided to have an audience of primary and secondary, which means we had to develop a web app that's appropriate for 5-year-olds and 17-year-olds. So that's been another challenge. And in terms of the age groups most engaged, we don't have that data through yet. So we haven't looked at that as of yet, but I'm sure we will do. In terms of the teachers, it's been mainly secondary schools that have secondary school teachers that have been engaged. So that could be indicative of which students are more engaged as well.
Great, thank you. And is this a purely UK project, or is there an opportunity for collaboration with other countries as well?
So this is for now a purely UK project, but like I said, past August, we are looking at expanding, building upon what we've done. So there could be potential for collaboration with other countries then.
Great, thank you. And I'm not sure, obviously, as you said, this project is still ongoing. So there's just a question here in terms of linking the results and especially with the particulate concentrations with external concentrations, for example, from ambient air quality monitoring stations run by the local authority. Is there any plans for doing that?
Yeah, so I think, and you might already know this, but the kind of work that the time and capacity local authorities have is really different depending on which area. So we have had some local authorities really excited about this and wanting to know which schools are involved and being able to link up in those ways. And then there's some that we get radio silence from. So there will be some plans to try and do that, but it's very variable, I would say.
Mm. And then we have another attendee here saying that they're interested in this project as they're currently working on the characterization of airborne microplastics in coastal areas and its seasonal variation. Oh, sorry. So they're asking again what kind of equipment you use, but I'm guessing it doesn't do things like microplastics, the one that you're looking at.
No, we do have a couple of deep dives which are coming from the University of Surrey, where they're planning to go into schools and do some more concentrated work. And I also know there's a researcher called Ben Williams, and he's doing a similar kind of work. He did about microplastics in the home with a citizen science method, and they've now got funding to do some of this kind of work in schools as well. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, please do email me and I'll send you some of the details. But yeah, for us, we're not looking at microplastics and we're just using the SAMHE monitors.
Great, thank you. Another attendee is asking, so the CO2 traffic light system is presumably based on HSE guidance. Are the daily averages based on a 24-hour period, or is it just the occupied time? And are the monitors only used in traditional teaching classes, or have you used them in specialist subjects where certain pollutants may be more abundant? For example, TVOCs from art classes, for example.
So the daily average that you can manipulate on the data visualization page is you can choose whether that's 24-hour period or the school period, because obviously we would expect them to be much lower overnight when there isn't anybody there. And the second part of that question, so some of the data that we ask is what type of classroom is this? Is this an art room? Is this a food tech room? Is this a D&T room? So that we can see what that data is saying in relation. So hopefully we might be able to see some trends, particularly in terms of like TVOCs and PM, if it was an art classroom or if it was a cooking classroom, for instance. And I think in a couple of months, we will be asking them all to move their monitors. So we've got different activities for them to tell us, has something changed? So they might be in a classroom which was just a normal classroom and is now being used for science, etc. So we've tried to accommodate all of those different things. We don't tell them which classroom to put it in. We just ask them to report to us with as much detail as possible.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. And then a bit of a kind of specific question, but have you got a rough cost for the monitors? As like what kind of prices are you looking at for putting them in schools?
I don't know what the costing of the monitors is. That would be something to email the hello@SAMHE email address because they will definitely have that information there.
Great, thank you. And then just a question about air quality in schools more generally. What are the major sources of PM 2.5 in schools?
So that's something that we're going to be looking at once we've got the data through. So like I said, with things like data detectives, there's a chance for the schools to actually investigate some of that themselves. So if they see a spike in PM 2.5, they will then be able to discuss and have a think about, oh, actually, it could have come from this, it could have come from that. And from that, we'll get more information. We'll be able to then interrogate that data and some of that information that's given to us for us to come to some of those type of conclusions.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. And there's a kind of a similar-ish question, which is saying, are you considering including other environmental quality parameters once the initial data set is complete to allow a more holistic understanding of school indoor environments?
So that's something that is potentially being considered for after August. Another thing that we're looking at as well is like how to pair up with outdoor air quality as well. So often what we found is indoor air quality specialists and outdoor air quality specialists like work in very different ways. But actually, when we're asking classrooms to open windows, for instance, well, there's going to make a difference if they're on a main busy road and if they're not. And so this is some of the, like you said, the other environmental factors that we're going to start looking at. But yeah, in terms of indoor air quality parameters, I think that's something that we might be looking at putting in proposals for post August.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then one thing you kind of mentioned when you were introducing citizen science generally was the importance of interdisciplinarity and kind of having those interdisciplinary teams. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the kind of key success factors of building those interdisciplinary teams. And then we've got a specific question saying, did you have health and education policymakers on board for this project?
So in terms of health and education policymakers, yeah, we work directly with the UK Health and Security Agency and their partners in the project. We also work with the Department of Education as well. And we have an engagement panel, which has got a bunch of people, specialists across policy education, who we feed back to every month. And you know, they sit on a bit of a steering committee to be able to either give us ideas or so they can report back about what we're doing as well. So yeah, we're quite heavily connected to policy, which is great for our impact as well. In terms of citizen science and building together a citizen science team, one of the most important parts of it, which isn't usually a part of a lot of research teams, is the communications angle.
Mm.
Um, and also having specialists. So I was brought on because I've done a lot of work in schools, and being able to know, and it's just things like, you know, if teachers go on Twitter, what time would that be? Or what does a usual school day look like? What does the curriculum look like? It's having some in-depth information about the audience that you're going for, because usually in a team of researchers, you're going to have that specialist knowledge about the area already. What you need then is specialist knowledge about your audience who you want to work with and collaborate with. And that's one, so that your research is as relatable as possible. But it's also to make sure it's non-exploitative. What's really important is the ethics of citizen science. We never want to do a project which makes people worse off, or causes harm in any kind of way. So we're really careful about that. And to be able to put together an ethical citizen science project, you need to know about the people that you want to work with, what's best for them, how this can integrate into their lives with very little effort, and what's important to them, really, really considering what is important to them, not just the researchers.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Rhys. That was so interesting. And it looks like that's all the questions we've got. You've done amazing. Oh, there's just one more that's just popped in. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. So you've mentioned interacting with school in terms of real-time data to explore different scenarios. Do you also use an alert system with trigger levels as well, or is it mostly pre-planned interactions with citizen scientists?
So we don't use an alert level. Like I said, they have the traffic light colours to
Mm,
be able to show the different levels of CO2. And we don't do any kind of, the only intervention we do is through the activities where we encourage them to close windows, open windows,
mm,
etc. But it is very much so, if a school just never did any of the activities and just plugged in the monitor, we would just get all of that data as well. So some of it necessarily isn't intervention based, some of it is, like I said, that's to make sure that schools can just use it in whatever way they want to.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, you've answered an amazing 19 questions. So thank you so much for that. I wonder, just as I do the outro, if you'd be happy to just share your final slide again with your email
Yes.
address, that would be great. And thank you so much. It was a really interesting presentation. Great to hear about how you can involve citizen science in air quality research. So thank you very much for joining us. And thanks to all of you, our attendees, for logging in and getting so involved in the Q&A. That's really great. I hope you found that as informative as I did. If you're an IES or IQM member, don't forget to record your attendance using the IES CPD tool, which you can access by logging into the members area on the IES website. This webinar has been recorded and it will be made available on the IES YouTube and the IQM website. And if you're watching this recording on YouTube, please do subscribe to our channel, like the video, and hit the bell to gain notifications of new content. Just before I let you all go for lunch, I just wanted to flag the next IQM event, which is the Routes to Clean Air Conference, taking place as a 2-day event this year on the 10th and 11th of October in Manchester. This conference will feature thought-provoking presentations and panel discussions, ensuring an extensive exploration of the most relevant subjects in air quality management, as well as plenty of time for networking and connecting with fellow air quality professionals. And you can register for this and find out lots more information about the agenda on the IQM website. A massive thank you again to Rhys, and a thanks to all of you. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.